Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Last First Date Radio, featuring interviews with experts in dating, relating, and mating in midlife. And now, here's your host, Sandy Weiner.
This is episode number 373, How to Create More Connection Through Conflict, with CrisMarie Campbell and Susan Clarke. Hello, everybody. This is Sandy Weiner, and welcome to Last First Date Radio, where we believe it is never too late for love, and that a woman of value naturally attracts the respect and rewards she deserves in life and in love. What is a woman of value? She is somebody who knows her value, and she shows up, stands up, and speaks up in support of what she knows to be her truth. And this is really the core of the work I do, both for women in dating and relationships and in my work with women at work through corporations, and the work I do to help women be better leaders and speakers and set better boundaries. We're in the midst of boundary season here at Last First Date, and my co-leader and I, Teresa Byrne, are launching our Boundaries course again. This Sunday is the launch date, and so we have a webinar that is going to take place. If you're listening to this in real time, it's called How to Say No Without Feeling Guilty, Mean, or Selfish. And you can sign up right now, even if you can't attend live. It's this Thursday, September 26th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. And the URL for that is Teresa Byrne, TeresaByrne.com/How to Say No Webinar. And there's dashes between How to Say No Webinar. So that's TeresaByrne.com, How to Say No Webinar. Join us. We are going to teach you how to stop that auto yes and all the other crap that we do when we don't have good boundaries. Every week I bring you a tip on how to be a woman of value. This week's tip is don't make assumptions. Oh, my God. I just got off the phone with my mom a little while ago, and she made a huge assumption about a friend of hers and why she didn't invite her over. And, you know, and it hurt her feelings. And this is what happens when we make assumptions about people. So my challenge for you this week is to, instead of making an assumption, get curious. Really just think about 5 other ways that person might have meant whatever it is that you're interpreting. And if you can ask that person directly, that's always the best way. Before I bring on CrisMarie and Susan, I also want to invite you to join my free Facebook group. It's called Your Last First Date. This is a group for women over 40 who want to have healthy relationships. And it's very, very positive, forward-focused. We don't allow ranting, we don't allow bashing, we don't allow name-calling. I just kicked out 2 people today. So we keep it safe and sane with boundaries like everything else in life, and that's the way to do it. So let's talk about my guests today. If you're like most people, you avoid confrontation like it's the plague. So what if there was a new way to look at conflict as something to be welcomed and not avoided? And what if you could learn to use conflict to improve all your relationships? Well, my guests today are CrisMarie Campbell, who's an Olympic rower, Boeing flight test engineer. She has her MBA, and Susan Clarke is a former marriage therapist and equus coach. That's horses. They are the authors of The Beauty of Conflict, Harnessing Your Team's Competitive Advantage, and a new book called The Beauty of Conflict for Couples. As partners in work and life for over 20 years, they have adapted their proven step-by-step process, honed by working with Fortune 100 companies like Johnson & Johnson, Microsoft, AT&T, and San Francisco Giants to help long-term couples use conflict as a catalyst to greater intimacy, passion, and fulfillment. Welcome to the show, CrisMarie and Susan.
Oh, we're happy to be here. This is CrisMarie. Yes. And this is Susan. We're excited to be on live today.
Awesome. Well, I love this topic. Obviously, communication, boundaries, conflict resolution is a big thing for me. And I love the concept that conflict actually brings us closer. So a lot of people think that people who fight all the time are probably not meant to be together. But you say that it's actually a positive sign and it can bring you closer. So, and having no conflict could be a red flag. So let's talk about that. What do you have to say?
You bet. This is CrisMarie, and I mean, I come from the background where relationships are, I thought a good relationship is one where everything is smooth. And so I worked my tail off to try to make sure I didn't upset anybody. I was a pleaser and an achiever. And when I finally was like, gosh, I've got everything right, the perfect house, the job, the partner, why am I so miserable? And a lot of it is because I wasn't bringing forward my own voice. And what we have found in long-term relationships, sure, it's nice to get along, but really it's a marathon, not a sprint in a long-term relationship. And you really need to know how to deal with differences, because otherwise what wound up happening for me is I thought my opinion didn't matter, or how I felt didn't matter, or what I wanted didn't matter. And so when I met Susan, and she had dealt with groups in conflict, and I saw her deal with somebody who was kind of more of a bully, which is kind of what my dad was. I was like, she did it really real and honest, and I thought, I want to learn how to do that because I could feel the aliveness. And when we got together, I kept thinking, oh, we need, the conflict would come up, and I'd be like, I'm out of here. And she's like, no, I want to hear your opinion. And I started to believe it and develop the courage to speak up. And lo and behold, 9 times out of 10, we would come up with a unique solution that wasn't my way or her way. It wasn't some sort of compromise. It was a new creation, and that's why we call it the beauty of conflict. It's not the fun or the joy or the ease, but the beauty, which has richness and depth and new possibilities.
I love that.
We also talk about. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I just before I hear from you, I do want to hear, but I wanted to just reflect for a minute because you brought up your father, which I think people need to really hear that this way of thinking comes from childhood often, that we have this idea that we can't speak up, or that all conflict is bad. So many of us have childhoods that did not have good communication and place where feelings were safe. So I love that, and I just want to bring that out, and also that you come up with something unique and beautiful, and I think that many people don't see that. I used to meet people who would say to me, oh, I never had a fight with my spouse ever. We had a great marriage. And I would say, did you ever have an honest conversation?
Yeah.
So
yes.
It's not a badge of courage. It's really just keeping yourself from being authentic.
Yeah. And I mean, from my background with the colonel was the dad, and anger was velcroed with violence because he would yell, and sometimes he would get physical. And so for sure my nervous system was wired to, nope, never mind, I won't say anything and I'll go along. And it takes a while to actually shift that pattern. It took a while for me to shift that pattern in my nervous system, but I did. And because sometimes we learn those coping mechanisms before we even had words. So they're very deep, entrenched patterns.
Yeah,
this
definitely. Thanks. And Susan?
Susan, did you want to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say, for sure, we have a line that we often tell people of, no boundaries, no conflict, meaning that if you actually don't, and you were talking earlier about some of the work you do around boundaries and boundarying, and we think really boundaries are self-expression, you coming forward and defining yourself in the world. And any time that you come forward and say what you want, what you like, what you dislike, which is that act of boundarying and self-defining, there's going to be conflict, especially because we all have different things that we like and we dislike. And actually, loving and long-term relationships have nothing to do with always liking each other. It has to do with being willing to talk about what you do like and don't like and don't want. And I think people so often get confused by relationships being about just closeness. And relationships are actually places where it's okay to say you don't like something and you do like something, and you still are going to hang in with each other. And that to us is what we defined as intimacy and what creates a long-term relationship. And sometimes you're distant, and being able to talk about that and say that really is what builds the foundation to keep the relationship going. And so that is the nature of where there can be conflict, when there are those different desires and wants and things. But when you realize you can talk about them and still hang in with each other, then you know you've got something that's pretty long-term, resilient, and special.
Yes, I love the definition of what a healthy relationship looks like. I think so many people have this fantasy of that everything is perfect and we have all the same likes. And actually, I have seen so many couples who are attracted to the same interests, which is good, but it's not at the core of who you are. And just somebody I was speaking to the other day said to me that he met a woman online who volunteered for a soup kitchen just like he did. And he said, wow, I thought she must be a really empathic person just like me. But he heard her on the phone saying something really disparaging about somebody, but he kind of shoved that under the rug. And then when they were together, she made some comments that were disgusting, like really awful comments that showed anything but an empathic person. So it's like you take those things and you fill in the blanks and you go, oh, well, that person must be just like me and we have the same values, but you don't necessarily have the same values. And if you do, if you have the same worldview, if you have similar values, then you can resolve conflict in a much healthier way, I think. So can you speak to that, the difference between like similar interests versus like what the core foundation of the relationship is?
Yeah, for sure. We think about, rather than compatibility, really the ability to be empathetic and curious with your partner is probably more critical in a healthy relationship, because I would not want to date the same person I am, like somebody just like me. And if I can actually get interested in the other person, even when we're bumping into something that maybe even where we do have different values, because they're not all going to be aligned, hopefully the big ones are, but when we are in a different place, let's say around money, and I'm a saver, Susan's a spender, maybe. And so I would, if I can slow down and ask her, be curious, just like you were saying, and say, why is this so important to you that we spend money on X, Y, and Z? And then when she starts to talk, she's going to start to talk about what's driving her at a deeper level, rather than the top line of do we spend or save. It's more, I'm getting to know her and seeing this human being who's different from me, and can I actually have empathy and curiosity for how she's putting the world together? Because it probably makes sense over there, and can I actually develop a connection to that? Because that's the juice that we all want, that sense of human connection that comes out when we slow down and ask a deeper question, like why is this so important to you, to really understand the other person.
Yes, I love that. I think the why is always what drives us. And people will look at other people as the other. You know, they're different from me, and not get curious and find out what motivates you to do whatever. I mean, I was talking to a client this morning, and I was talking about the stories behind tattoos, for example. And she said, I always felt it wasn't PC to ask why, what the story was behind someone's tattoo. I said, are you kidding me? People love to talk about their tattoos. Yeah. And you find out like a whole story about something that's important to that person. It's a great way to connect and find out more, instead of saying, oh, all people with tattoos are weird, like how some people might look at that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, what you're talking about applies to pretty much anything and everything. Like when a relationship starts, when you meet that person who you think you're going to fall in love with, you immediately project an entire long story about what they're going to be like, usually based on one little nano cube of information. Like I knew CrisMarie was an Olympian, and I made up a world of stories about who she was and what that meant in terms of our relationship. It's just from that thing. Now, 9 times out of 10, most people don't spend that much time talking about their romance, their imagination, and they just assume it's all happening, as opposed to sharing and talking about that, and especially in the romance phase. You're kind of, you've got all sorts of hormones and dopamine and everything else going because you've fallen in love, so you don't take the time to figure out that maybe you don't even know right then. It's just a romance with your imagination. You're in relationship with your imagination, not the other person. And so it can be really important to start to talk about what is my romance, and that happens throughout the stages of relationships. Like when you decide to have children, you each have different romances around what that means and what that looks like, and it could be about careers or where you live. And unless we actually take the time to talk about those things and really share them with each other, we won't even know that we have different storylines, because we're so quick to throw that out and make assumptions and assume we're all on the same page when we probably haven't even said, here's what I thought it was going to be like. And that's a pretty vital part of relating.
Well, and even when the person does show up differently than how I have cast them in my movie, because that's basically what I'm doing. I'm casting, her in my movie, and then I'll start to, maybe if I just hint or manage or nudge, I can get this person back in line. Like with Susan, she dressed too casually for me. We were working in the corporate setting, and I'm like, okay, what I did is I didn't talk to her about it. I set up a personal shopper date, and I coordinated the whole thing, hoping, of course, she'll see the light. She did not see the light. But then what happens is we start to blame the person, like, wait a minute, you're not playing the part I cast you, and then we start to control. It starts to escalate, and that's when we hit that power struggle conflict point, and we think we've found the wrong person. If only I could find the right person, then this would be okay. And quite often, it's not about that at all. It's really, how can I actually slow down and really get to know this person? We talked about intimacy, and we define it as into me, see, meaning can I share with this person my romance and then be curious about what is really happening over there? That's the bridge that can help really build the glue for creating a long-term relationship.
Yeah, that's a great example of trying to impose your fashion sense on somebody else.
Yes.
Here, this is the right way to dress. Just do this without discussing it.
Right.
When so much just came up for me when you were talking about my marriage, and I married somebody who I checked off a whole bunch of checks that I thought were important for marriage. We had to have the same religious beliefs and want the same amount of children and want to live in the same kind of place. I didn't know much about what a relationship should be. And the truth was, even religiously at the time, we both practiced similarly, like we both had the same observances. But our worldview about religion, God, all of that was never the same. And that became a huge issue for us. And so now I really understand it's not what it looks like on paper. It's really about can you have to have these conversations, and also where we lived became a major issue for us because he was so set on living near his family. That was the most important thing, and that did not work for me. And that we had so much conflict over that, and it was just my way or the highway. And so, knowing how to pick a better partner is also part of all this. But somebody wanted to say something before I said
I think
that.
Susan was about to say something.
Well, I was just, actually I love listening to what you said because I do think it's so important to realize that it's not what's on the paper. It's, talking about it, understanding, where you each are and reaching behind that. And, even what you said about, I can imagine it would be difficult to find out he wants to live close to his family and, trying to explore that, like, why is that so important to you? Because it really doesn't fit for me. And hoping to have those conversations over and over again about different things, because it's going to keep coming up in the in the relationship until you actually have that. I think I think it was Gay Hendricks said, behind every issue and communication issue is a sweaty palm conversation that needs to happen, and a 10-minute sweaty palm conversation. But we don't actually have that conversation, and we do all sorts of other things, because in our most basic relationship, we don't want to feel abandoned, and we also don't want to feel inundated. And those are two things that can create a lot of tension. And so it's important to talk about it, and yet it's so hard to do, because it's like, oh, I don't want to say this, because what happens if it's a deal breaker? And I think I've found someone who's a perfect match for me. But better to have that difficult conversation than to not have it and discover later, this really was an irreconcilable difference that we needed to talk about to see if there was a way to get through it, and not just compromise, but to get to a place of really each feeling heard, seen, and recognized.
Yeah. And there's so much avoidance of the conversations. I see in my Facebook group, people will post things like, I was with somebody for a year, and I never saw the inside of their house. I never met their kids. And then finally I saw their house, and they're like hoarders. Well, like, hello, what happened during the whole year? So it's I don't want to bring it up. I don't want to be pushy. I don't want to feel needy. A lot of that happens, and that's why I love teaching this too, because it's not that hard to have these conversations if you keep practicing. And there's so many safe ways to practice. I talk about my son a lot, because he lives with me, and we have these tough conversations all the time. He sets boundaries with me when he comes home from work and is exhausted, and he'll say, I just need time to be by myself, and I'll let you know when I can talk to you. I love that. That's so clear, I'd much rather he did that than he stayed in the room with me and he got pissed off at me.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the things we mentioned in the book, The Beauty of Conflict for Couples, is a simple tool when you're worried about having these conversations and thinking we've got to come to a solution, like we've got to make a decision on where we're going to live, or if we're going to get married or have kids, whatever it is. And it's a tool for approaching hot topics when you need a little bit more space to kind of even figure out your own thinking out loud, because so often when we're not bringing things up, there's a lot that's happening in our heads, but until we start talking about it, we don't get clear. And it's called a 555, and it's for two people. Like, sometimes somebody will want to bring up a topic, and the other partner will be like, oh my gosh, we're going to talk about this for hours, I don't want to do that. So it's this contained, boundaried way to have a conversation where the first 5 minutes, partner A talks about, let's say it's where we're living or sex or children, whatever it is, and just their thoughts about it, and partner B is just listening, and not, just really listening with the intent to be influenced. Just take it in that this is this person sharing their world and how they put the pieces together. You don't have to change or agree or anything. And then 5 minute ends, and you really honor that time boundary, and partner B then gets their 5 minutes to talk about that topic. And again, then partner A is listening, just with the willingness to be influenced and see and witness their partner. And the last 5 minutes is a dialogue, where you both you can check out your story or reflect back what you heard or ask a follow-up question. And then at the end of the 15 minutes, you stop talking about it and you go do something different, or you take space, whatever fits. It's not a 5-5-45, it's a 5-5-5. And it's a really simple tool to get underneath kind of what is driving the person and how they put the world together. It's not to drive to a solution. It's more to investigate what's behind it. And if you do it a few times, you'll probably, a solution will emerge that fits for you both, and it's probably not what you originally thought was going to have to be the answer.
I like that. It reminds me of imago therapy a little bit.
They have similar. They have something similar, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
So, and it's really all about listening. Yeah.
Listening as we're talking. Go ahead.
No, carry on. I was just acknowledging the imago part and knowing they had a process similar. So that was it. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. I once watched a demo of a conversation done in the imago therapy style, and they had actual little toys. Like one person had a heart, the person who was talking, and the person who was listening had a little ball that was like the earth, and it was like a little rubber ball with a painting of the earth on it. And they would put the ball under their butt to signify that they were sitting on their world. Like you weren't going to die while you're listening. Your world is under you while you're. It just was like a really cool demonstration to me, because listening was such a hard thing for most of us, and me in particular, because we all want to just contribute and talk. And the listening part is so important, because a person needs to feel heard, and you need to acknowledge that you heard and understood. And boy, if everybody did this, the 555, we'd have a much happier world.
I think so.
So
yes.
In the book, you also talk about makeup sex. And this I found fascinating, that too much makeup sex could be a sign of an unhealthy relationship, where a lot of people think, this is the greatest. So can you explain that?
Well, often, this is Susan, often makeup sex comes when it's kind of like you get into a fight, and then one of you apologizes, like, oh, I'm sorry, and then it seems like it's all been resolved, and so you have great sex. Often, I mean, a lot of couples I worked with would describe that, like, oh, yeah, we got into a big fight, but then he or she said they were sorry, and then we had great sex. Now, the problem with that is that doesn't ever actually address what was actually happening. It's kind of, and often people will say, I'm sorry, without really saying, what was I up to? What was I even doing? Why were we at such odds with each other? And too often that part of the dialogue and conversation gets missed, and so you can keep having that same apologetic, great sex with an apology, but you actually never have the right conversation. And that's why we think sometimes that can be detrimental in some relationships, because too often you're not getting to what's underneath it.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And but the sex is good, so I think that's what but eventually that's going to probably not be enough. So
yeah, I know some couples who were glued together with makeup sex, and I never really understood how that worked. But
right.
I personally couldn't live like that. But I think that also a lot of times people say I'm sorry as a way of shutting you up.
Yes.
And that drives me crazy. So that seems to be a little bit connected here. It's like, I'm sorry, let's just get to the sex part.
Right. Yes. Too often that is the case. And I'm sorry is very different than, wow, I'm the type of person who did this, and really owning that maybe I did something that was painful or difficult for my partner. I'm sorry is a way to avoid saying that a lot of times, because it's uncomfortable to say. But it's important to actually recognize, wow, I did do that, and I've done it before. And great sex isn't going to take that away until I really look at what I'm doing. So
yeah, it's the whole responsibility piece. That's just so crucial. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, really important. I mean, I could talk about this for the next 5 hours.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Here's another question. A lot of times women in long-term relationships say that they feel alone and they want more intimacy. And I know I felt like that in my marriage. Felt like I was totally alone for most of it. So in your book, you say it's possible to have intimacy without going to couples counseling, or even if the other partner doesn't want to do the work. And I know this comes up so much, because the people say, I'm doing all the work, or I'm going to therapy, but they're not. So how is that possible?
Well, we talk about this in the book, that in any situation there's what we call the me axis and the we axis. And we spend a lot of time talking about the we, how to have a conversation with our partner. But a lot of times really people who are suffering from their own sense of not having the connection they want or anything like that, if they actually got deeply in touch with what they needed, it may not need to be, and started to address, how can I feel alive? What do I need to express, take care of? And not just assume that their partner is going to do all that work, but actually start to do it for themselves. Like, even around sexuality, well, I'm not talking about going out and acting out with other sexual partners, but to be more aware of how sexuality plays out, to wear clothing that makes you feel more alive, to go dancing, to do things that start to bring your life back. And too often, all of that gets addressed like my partner has to change for me to bring any of this aliveness into my life. And we believe that if you start to explore your own, what am I doing? How could I be more alive? That one thing, you'll start to shine, and likely your partner is going to get interested. And if they don't, that's information. But we found over and over again that if one partner starts to, bring their own aliveness into fullness and take responsibility for that, that becomes a catalyst for the whole relationship to potentially change.
That makes a lot of sense.
We had one woman who really wanted, she was really feeling lonely. She wanted to do more European travel, and her husband's like, no, I'm not interested. And she was pretty miserable, and then we started to work with her, and we encouraged her, so what would you create? And she wound up, she went traveling on her own. She went to Thailand, she went to Switzerland, and she did this a few different trips, and her husband saw how fun it was for her, and eventually he's like, okay, I want to come too. So it is, as any work that you do on your me and you really get in touch and take care of your own needs, you will be more shiny and attractive, and maybe your partner will wake up, maybe not, but you're going to be having a lot more fun and feeling more fulfilled.
Yes, so true. And you see so many people who don't do that work, who end up in relationship after relationship and complain about the same things over and over.
Yes.
Why did he do that to me? And it's like, oh, hello, you're the common denominator here.
Yeah, exactly. It's so true. I mean, I get women that I coach, they're like, I think I married the wrong person. And then they whatever, if they change and marry a different person, they're still, no matter where you are, where you go, there you are. And you're going to keep creating those results unless you do something differently.
Yes. Absolutely. So true. And it's so empowering to do this work because not only do you enjoy your life more, but you have more intimacy, you have more authenticity, and you have better relationships all around. So this is
exactly
so crucial, so important. So everybody go buy the book, The Beauty of Conflict. That's what it's called, right?
The Beauty of Conflict for Couples, yeah.
For couples, yes. And tell our audience how they can find you.
Yes. Well, we have our, it's pretty easy to find us because a lot of our things are The Beauty of Conflict. So we have a podcast called The Beauty of Conflict, our book, The Beauty of Conflict for Couples, and we have a business book, The Beauty of Conflict for teams, basically. And our main website, our business website is thriveinc.com, THRIVEINC.com. And you can find our book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, IndieBound. And on Instagram, we're Thrive Inc., and Facebook, we're Thrive Inc. MT for Montana. And our personal names, CrisMarie Campbell and Susan Clarke.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today and for doing this amazing work. This is changing lives, and I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you, Sandy. It's delightful to be here.
Yeah. And you're doing good work. I love that, helping people.
Thank you so much. And everyone listening today, thank you for listening. And if you love our show, please rate us, review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we hope you go on your last first date very soon. Have a great day.
Yes.
All right. Bye.
Bye.